Today we're unboxing a brand new iPad mini 4 that's been sealed in its box since 2015. I got this on eBay for just $100, so I'm really excited to get it opened up. And here is the iPad. We have a gold model here, and I definitely feel this is authentic just due to the scratches on this plastic wrap. This is actually a top-of-the-line 128GB model. I'm just going to slice the back of this plastic wrap off so I can retain a sealed appearance from the front of this box. So with that removed, let's go ahead and lift open this box. And there we have our iPad mini 4. This is in its original frosted plastic packaging. So I will use this pull tab and lift it up. And now we can take a closer look at this iPad. This gold color looks incredible, and thankfully I don't think the battery has expanded in this. A bloated battery is definitely one of the biggest concerns when buying a device that's been sealed in a box for almost 10 years. We'll set that aside for just a second and check out what accessories are in the box. So looks like we have a 10-watt power adapter here, as well as a Lightning to USB cable. And for our literature packet, we get a quick start guide, some warranty info, and 2 Apple stickers. And now we will turn our attention back to the star of the show. So I'll use this pull tab to release the iPad from its plastic envelope. And wow, seeing this color makes me really miss when Apple made gold iPads. So let's slide it out of this envelope now. And here is the iPad freshly out of its original seal. Of course, it's looking absolutely flawless. That diamond chamfered edge is especially striking on this gold color. And now for the moment of truth. Let's see if this iPad's battery has survived 10 years of sitting in a box. Okay, well that is a great sign. We get the battery charging icon. A bad sign would be if the Apple logo were to immediately come up. And that's because sometimes on these old sealed Apple devices, the batteries go into a state of deep discharge and they no longer will accept a charge. So since this iPad is showing good signs of life, I'm going to leave it here to charge for a few hours. Okay, well it's been a few hours now and I have the iPad mini all charged up here. It actually powered up within about 10 minutes of plugging it in. But I did turn off the device and leave it to charge for several hours in an attempt to not stress out the battery too much. But here is the device now on 100%, so let's go ahead and go through this iOS 9 setup. Okay, well, I got the infamous iOS 9 activation error for a second, but I pressed retry once and looks like I got through. I wasn't too worried about that as that issue really only affects the A9 processor devices. And this iPad has an A8 processor. And there we go. We are met with the iOS 9 home screen. And of course, a prompt to update to iOS 15, which we will definitely not be doing. Let's head into settings and see which version of iOS 9 we have. Okay, looks like we have 9.3.5 here. I think that was actually the last version of iOS 9. So realistically, this has probably only been sitting in a box for about 9 years. But we do also get confirmation that this is a 128GB model. It's pretty rare to find a 128GB model as these were $599 when new. The base model 16GB model is definitely the most common. So let's talk about what the iPad mini 4 was. This iPad was released September 9th, 2015 at the same keynote event as the first generation 12.9-inch iPad Pro as well as the iPhone 6s. It was definitely not the star of that event as it was only talked about for less than 20 seconds in that keynote. It was just quickly explained as bringing the power and performance from the iPad Air 2 to the iPad mini line. And that was pretty accurate. This iPad shared a lot with the iPad Air 2 that was released in October 2014. The most notable being the display and the design. So the Mini 4 gained the anti-reflective coating as well as the laminated display from the iPad Air 2. So while the display on previous iPad mini models would pretty much act as a mirror, the Mini 4's anti-reflective coating really did a great job on cutting down on those pesky reflections. And the fact that it was laminated meant that the actual panel was fused to the glass. while on the Mini 3 and older those were separate components. So your content would not be as immersive on a non-laminated display due to that air gap. So here's a side-by-side comparison on those displays. The Mini 4 was also much thinner than the first through third generation Minis. So here you can see a good comparison on that with the Mini 4 on top. The Mini 4 also got a new volume button design reminiscent of the iPhone 6 and 6S. It also removed the mute switch and moved the dual microphones to each side of the camera. This iPad Mini 4 was really what the iPad Mini 3 should have been. That iPad Mini 3 released just 1 year prior to this goes down as being one of the worst iPads in history. And that's because its only functional improvement over the iPad Mini 2 was a Touch ID sensor. It also brought a gold color option as well as some different storage capacities and a very slight tweak to the rear camera design. But it retained the A7 processor and 1GB of RAM from the previous model. And that may not have been such a big deal, but the iPad Air 2 was announced at the same time as the Mini 3. And as it brought a much thinner design and really premium display qualities, it made the Mini 3 look pretty outdated. So in fall 2015 when Apple released this, it was really well received. And it made the lineup make a lot more sense, as you could get this for $399 or get a Mini 2 for $269. One area where the Mini 4 was a bit behind the iPad Air 2 was its processor. The Mini 4 had an A8 processor, while the iPad Air 2 had an A8X processor. And that A8 processor was only dual-core, while the A8X was tri-core. So this iPad is powered by the same chip used in the iPhone 6. So that A8 chip meant this iPad was one generation behind, as the A9 generation of chips was released at the same keynote event. Although this iPad did have a saving grace. And that was including 2GB of RAM like the iPad Air 2. That 2GB of RAM was double the 1GB that was included on all other standard A8 chip devices. And it really helped this iPad last longer. While the A8 powered iPhone 6 with 1GB of RAM received software updates through iOS 12, this iPad Mini 4 with the A8 chip and 2GB of RAM received updates all the way through iPad OS 15 in 2021. This iPad Mini was actually sold all the way until March 2019 when it was replaced with the iPad Mini 5th generation. It did receive several price cuts and storage capacity bumps, but this iPad being sold by Apple for 3.5 years has to make it one of the longest selling iOS devices. So now let's take a look at iOS 9 on this iPad specifically, and we'll start off with the wallpaper selections. So these dynamic wallpapers were carried over from iOS 7, and these wallpapers generated dots that would move according to the tilt of your device. But iOS 9 really reduced the amount of still wallpapers. There are only 24 here to choose from, while iOS 8 was definitely in the 40s. So this blue and orange kind of sand looking wallpaper was the default. And here is the rest of the wallpaper selection. Honestly, these are not too exciting to me, especially coming from the iOS 8 wallpaper selection. And something I always forget to talk about in my iPad videos are the multitasking gestures. So these gestures launched in iOS 5 and they're actually still present in iPad OS today. So you can use a 5-finger pinch to close your application. You can also use a 4-finger swipe up to access multitasking. And you can also use a 4-finger swipe to go between applications. This multitasking view is actually new for iOS 9. iOS 8 would keep your recent contacts at the top of the multitasking screen. And one thing I miss about the iOS 7 and 8 multitasking is that you would actually see the full window. And although the windows do appear larger in iOS 9, it's difficult to see content on the right edge of the application. iOS 9 brought some really important multitasking features to iPad. So you could do this slide over view. Slide over was only supported on the iPad Air and newer, as well as the Mini 2 and newer. And the iPad Mini 4 allowed you to turn that slide over multitasking into full split screen multitasking. This was also available on the iPad Air 2 and newer, and that's likely because this split screen multitasking really required that 2GB of RAM. So this is what Siri looks like on iOS 9. It has a very unique look with this kind of rainbow blur kind of going across the whole screen. And iOS 9 made a ton of improvements in the Notes application. You could now have checklists, And you could also do drawings. And you can now use 2 fingers on the keyboard to move around your cursor. Here's a look at the emojis included with iOS 9. This news application was new for iOS 9, but unfortunately it looks like this no longer works. So fortunately, the App Store still works on iOS 9. I was able to go in through my Purchase tab and download prior versions of a lot of apps. So I had the iLife and iWork applications, as well as a ton of games. So it's really nice that this device has 128 gigabytes of storage. I'm definitely going to have a lot of fun playing these old games on this iPad. I'm definitely partial to the Grand Theft Auto games as well as Temple Run. And since I had so much extra storage, I also did sync my full iTunes library to this iPad. So here's my collection of iPad minis on their original versions. I have the first generation iPad mini on iOS 6.0.1. I have the Mini 2 on iOS 7.0.4. And I now have the Mini 4 on iOS 9.3.5. So unfortunately, I am missing the Mini 3 on iOS 8. So I'm really pumped to have this iPad Mini 4 in my collection. And I'm really thrilled that this is in the gold color. Usually legacy iOS devices are very hard to find in the gold color on their original software. I'm also super grateful that the battery seems to be working perfectly on this device. Let me know in the comments below if you all have ever unboxed a sealed legacy iOS device. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.